Well, I'm sure there's thousands of people waiting to watch.
They are.
Let's see, here is Grant. You see Grant in here?
Yes, he's there.
Okay, there he is. I'll unmute Grant.
Right now, there's 23 people on the YouTube stream.
Okay, waiting.
Yeah.
So Grant won't let, I can't unmute Grant, so, and he's not responding. And we do have somebody, okay, so that some people are waiting, so let me,
It looks like we're up now.
okay, okay, Grant says we're live.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you.
are live. Okay.
Okay. Nagi, would you like me to just start off by reviewing the agenda?
Please.
Okay, Ivan, are you driving the presentations?
Yes, doing that now.
Okay, thank you. And what I'll do is, so we have 4 items on the agenda, and we've got, you know, really, we'll go as long as the commissioner want to go on this. And so, and yeah, I'm getting confirmation through text messages from all those anxiously waiting to watch. But what I'd like to do before I touch on the 4 agenda items and really our objectives behind them, I wanted to see if the commissioners had any questions on any subject that you don't see located here. And I'd be willing to do my best to try to respond to those questions. So, Nagi, if there's anything that any of the commissioners would like to, they're wondering about, or they want to provide input to us on, I'd love to hear that right now.
Okay, commissioners, you have the floor. Any questions? Anything other than whatever you see on the screen? Anything that between last week or last month and this month? Please state it now. Or hold your peace forever.
No, never that.
Hi, this is Donna. Obviously, here at SUU, we're looking at budget cuts, and we had attended. I had attended the Executive Appropriations Council or Executive Appropriations Committee meeting last week, and so I was kind of curious about how the budget cuts might affect us, and yet at the same time, listening to what Natalie had to say this morning, I'm more encouraged than discouraged. But I don't know if you can tie those 2 pieces together, Carlos.
Okay. I'll do my best and recognize that the budget right now, when you start to look at what, you know, we expect for revenues over the next, you know, we're going towards financial close here June 30th, and so we start a new financial year July 1. The legislature really right before all this, you know, really we came face to face with the pandemic. The session ended, the legislative session ended, and they had approved an FY21 budget. It's anticipated that they're going to go back into special session in early June and make adjustments to that FY21 budget. And I've spoken with multiple members of legislature and legislative staff. Everyone's doing their best to try to figure out what kind of recovery this looks like. To give you an idea in terms of what we know in terms of revenues, you know, that have come in, we just last week, so the first week of May, really, it was a week before that, we just got the actual revenues for March. And so we lag over a month before we know exactly what has come in. So we won't really know the impacts of April, which is going to be, you know, the biggest impact on the gas tax revenues. We won't know that until June, around the first week of June. So the legislature is trying to, you know, have their session as late as possible so they have the best information as possible. What the executive, you know, so as the commission knows, there's really 2, you know, we have multiple funds, but there's 2 major funds that the, well, I'll say 3, that the transportation works in. And if you go to our transportation, our UDOT website and look at the strategic direction, you can see the different funds, the revenues, and the expenditures that are in there. I'm not going to do that now. We've done that multiple times in the past. But really, so you've got the transportation fund. The transportation fund is essentially, you know, the big revenue generator there is the gas tax. The second biggest revenue generator there is what's called special fuel. That's diesel fuel. Obviously with driving being down, people have driven less miles, people are buying less gas, less revenues being generated for the transportation fund. Now, the transportation fund basically funds all of the operations for the department, pays our salaries, buys the salt, pays the utility bills, and one of the line items within the transportation fund is the highway construction line item. That is I think we had about 100, Terry will correct me, about $160 million that the commission has been working to prioritize programs and projects on. And that's what we've been working on here over the last couple of months through the STIP workshop. And those are projects that go out for construction. The executive appropriations last week anticipates that fund, the Hall Transportation Fund, could see between a $30 million and a $100 million reduction in revenues. So that's a pretty big range. We were around a little over $600 million is what had been appropriated for 21. And 70% of that stays with the department. 30% is distributed. Becky Bradshaw, comptroller's office, distributes that to the cities and counties, and that's what's referred to as the B&C, the money that goes to the cities and the counties. So we have always been, we get an appropriations, and that's the legislature's best guess at what monies are going to come in. But we're also responsible to make sure that we manage within the actual revenues that come in. So as Becky's monitoring those revenues every month on what's coming in through the tax commission, we're making adjustments in terms of timings of projects, because we have authority to spend what comes in, but we can't spend more than comes in. And which is a little different than other state agencies. They basically have an appropriated amount and they stay within that. So say we get appropriated $100 million in the transportation fund, but only $80 million comes in, we have to manage the $80 million. And so when you think about $35 to $100 million reduction, we still don't have clarity in terms of how that is going to be managed. During the special session, will they adjust our appropriation down? If they do that, it'll depend on how they do that. Will they do it across all the line items, or will they do it just within the highway construction line item? And I think the philosophy here is, if we think this is an ongoing cut where the revenues are not going to come back, then it probably would be appropriate to go across all the line items. If we believe this is a one-time and it's going to come back and it's just an issue of how long it should come back, then it should probably come from the highway construction item, where we can actually cash flow and time projects to meet the actual revenues coming in. That's still unclear on terms of how the legislature wants to do that. Now, the other side of it is the Transportation Investment Fund, and that's the big, over $700 million of sales tax that comes for those capacity projects. And those are basically those projects that you prioritize through the prioritization process. There's obviously a need for sales tax across all agencies. That funds basically government operations for the state of Utah. And so this is where the discussion has been, can we take some cash from the Transportation Investment Fund and replace it with bonding and keep the projects moving on the same schedule? And that's basically, that's a project neutral approach. I would say that is the most, today, the most likely approach that they're going to follow, because they're going to want to make sure they have a better understanding in terms of where the revenues are. And the other fund that I'll just briefly mention is the federal funds, which is interesting. Those are the 18.4-cent gas tax, 24-cent diesel tax that the federal government collects, goes to Washington, comes back to the state of Utah. And we're essentially a revenue neutral state. Most states are anymore. Especially when you consider between what we receive through the transit allocations and the highway allocations. And everyone thinks that, based on what was appropriated in Congress, that's the amount that's going to come in, no matter whether or not the revenues have come in or not. And I was on the phone yesterday with Administrator Nasom, Nicole, so she's the head of Federal Highway Administration, and talking about the receipts that they're seeing coming into the Highway Trust Fund. And they are seeing those reductions just as all the states are seeing those reductions. Now, I think we assume that the federal government can print some money for us, and we're going to keep that federal program going. I see Donna smiling at that. I haven't found a printing press in my back closet here yet, Donna, so sorry. We are scheduled for next Thursday to meet with our appropriations subcommittee, infrastructure general government. So there's 3 different agencies that go to that subcommittee, and we will have discussions about possible cuts and where those cuts should take place. I'm not smart enough to know where they're going to go on this, but there will be cuts. I don't know how much, but it's important that we as a department and a commission keep our programs moving forward, keep the work of the commission moving forward. We need to keep moving those projects so that we are ready, so that when decision makers decide what's the right thing for the state, we can be there to step forward. So Don, I don't know if that answered your question or just complicated the picture more.
No, I appreciate that a lot. And I know that all of those of us, Natalie's in the same position, all of those working with the state are just kind of eyeballing what comes next and how we adapt to that. So I'm pleased, as always, with the direction and the advance, the forward thinking that you and the department are taking.
Yeah, I think we are. And sorry, Natalie.
Oh, I just wanted to add something that I thought would be helpful. Department of Workforce Services released their new data today on unemployment claims, just came out this morning. But for the first time since the pandemic hit us, we had more individuals ending their unemployment claims than individuals filing new claims. That's a really big deal.
Yes.
And so now in 6 consecutive weeks of the drawdown getting smaller and smaller, and now we're starting to pick back up. So that's just, I'm not saying that the future's rosy, but we're getting there.
Yeah, Natalie, you mentioned it yesterday. I think the big point here is confidence, and having a positive trend brings confidence. I think taking most of the state to yellow status that the governor did last Saturday, again, sends a sign of confidence to our individuals, but also to our companies, and whether or not they're comfortable moving forward. I know for UDOT, most of our facilities, our buildings are in areas of yellow. Our Region 2 office is in Salt Lake City, so it's still under the orange category. But we are moving forward with figuring out the right way to, basically have our buildings open 8 to 5 so customers can walk in. And I think that's important to be able to demonstrate that the state of Utah is open for business, even though we never stop working. And I'm very proud of how we've kept everything moving forward during this. Having those doors open and having people there to greet people is, I think, going to be part of building this confidence. So,
Well, Carlos, if needed, I would like to take 100% pay cut to help the department.
You're so generous. Thank you. I appreciate it. The men and women of the department appreciate that.
Thank you.
If I might inject, I was just talking with the county. This coming weekend, we have the Outlaw Trail Ride here for the RVs, and they've decided they can go ahead and have that. And I think we're over 400 people that signed up to come and to ride that. So I think people want to get back to life and go working and dealing with the issues, and I think that's positive for the state. I think there are those that are going to have to be more cautious as the program outlined, but I believe, having sat there, that the legislature is still trying to get their hands on what's going to happen, how deep is this going to go. We will have some intermediate, but I think we're well positioned to rebound and come back.
Yes.
We really are. We really are. So, any other questions before I actually get to the agenda? And Heather or Ivan, would you bring up the agenda, please? I've got it.
It's coming.
Okay, here we go. So last month, I thought the ability for the public and elected officials to make comments on the recommendations on those projects that the department provided to the commission, I thought it was exceptional, the amount of comments we received and what I felt was engagement. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to go and spend some time and really kind of open a little bit on, let's go through those projects that we had comments on that were really not part of what we had recommended. And I want to allow for the commissioners to probe why or what was important to this community and maybe where did it rank. And so we wanted to spend time to have discussions around that. I didn't want to have any loose ends out there for commissioners. And so again, any questions fair on that? Then we wanted to have a chance to, we also had provided, and this is part of that workshop, the 2020 STIP. And the idea here is we had provided, first we looked at programs and then we looked at projects. And what we are aiming for is in the June commission meeting, we'll look for approval from the commission. And this is part of the annual cycle to send out the drafts 2020 STIP for public comments. It'll contain those projects that we had discussed last month. And we just wanted to see if there was any questions or concerns about what that list is. So you have a touch today, you'll have another touch next month if there's questions come up on any of those projects. These are not really the big sexy projects. These are the pavement preservation, the bridge projects, the safety projects. But we wanted to have that possibility. So once we send it out for public comments, we typically will then bring it back to the commission in August, review those comments, and see whether or not the commission is comfortable approving that 2020 STIP to send to the Federal Highways and Federal Transit Administration. We send it to them for approval. And what we try to have is approval from Federal Highways prior to the end of the federal fiscal year, which was September 30th. So that starting October 1, we are able to then move right into the next federal fiscal year and start getting those projects out on the street, advertised. As you know, we like to advertise the projects in the fall or the winter. We get better prices that time. It allows contractors to get ready so that when the weather breaks in the spring, we could try to get these projects done in one construction season. So that's what we wanted to do in number 2. Number 3, again, this is part of an annual cycle here. We have the statewide airport improvement plan. This is the capital construction plan for the airports around the state. And Jared, our director of aviation, will be here. And so this is an update on this plan. And the idea would be is to let you ask questions, let you sit on it for a month. And next month, we would be coming back and asking for approval on that. And that's what that item is. And so we just wanted to update you on kind of the process that we go through and just introduce it. And it'll be part of the commission meeting agenda tomorrow as well. A little lighter touch tomorrow, unless there's more questions. And then the last item is we have a loan request from Midvale City. We also had a statutory change to the state infrastructure bank that the commission administers. And so part of the change required development of a prioritization process. So we need to update the rule. We need to, we've provided a prioritization process for your consideration. And we are going to have an interesting debate about a possible motion. Midvale City would like approval on this. And the big change was in the statute going from a 10-year loan to a 15-year loan. And they would like approval of the 10-year loan and contingent on the finalization of the rule, convert that to a 15-year loan, because that's the way they've developed their finances on that. So we'll see if we can explain that one. That is convoluted, but we'll see if we can explain that in a way that is understandable. So that's what we got.
Carlos,
Yes, Kevin?
I have a question on that. Is this a revolving loan fund or
Yeah.
is it a one-time done?
No, this is so the loan is you will set the terms of the loan. The statute did provide guidance on the rates, but you approve the terms of the loan, and this one happened to be one that was directed by the legislature. But if it's one that just a community comes to you, you would approve or not approve the loan, but then they have to repay it.
Right. And then
So,
it becomes available to reloan to another
yes,
entity or
yes,
whatever.
yes.
So,
And so if, yeah,
which
sorry.
is a good system. And
Yes, it really is.
so are we, and I know we'll get into this, one of the questions, and I might have missed it, is are we setting in statute a way that which everyone knows these are available, and so anyone can apply?
Yes, any community can apply.
So
So,
how do they know that that's available? Or
yeah, and we haven't really gone out and advertised it. It's been something that we've had available now since I think it was iced tea. So it goes back to probably the mid 90s that it's been a tool that the commission has used.
right,
They could get on the website. And, as our regions are working with communities, so, a lot of the early projects, particularly, we might have been doing a paving job through a downtown area, and the city might have wanted to do their water lines ahead of the paving job, which we think is a
right.
good idea, so they don't come in and cut up a new road.
Uh,
So a lot of times that's a tool that our regions offer up to the communities. If they didn't have the money to do that work, they would offer that up as a way that the community could finance that project. And so a lot of this is the one-on-one conversation at the region level in the communities.
Right. Well, I think I remember voting for it, and I think
Yep.
that there's been some changes made, which makes it, I think, a lot better program.
Yep. Yep. So Linda has worked a lot on this, and Lyle McMillan is it fits within his division. And I believe he's going to be the one to present the proposed rule and the loan requests. And so he's a lot deeper than I am on this. So we can ask any questions there. So,
Carlos, this
yes.
is Wayne.
Hey, Wayne.
I believe you said that you probably wouldn't have a very good handle on funding until June. Is that likely to delay the public announcement on the STIP that was also in June?
No, we will still proceed with, see what we'll do as part of the STIP is we're setting up that the buffet table of projects that we're going to work on. And what we'll do as an organization based on the available cash flow, I use the term meter it. We may have to slow a project down until we have enough revenue coming in to be able to move that one to advertisement. Really, the gate at which we don't want to move projects through until we know we have ability to fund it is advertising it for construction. That's when we start to make us and the contracting community make significant investments, and it becomes much more difficult to be able to make a change at that point.
Okay, thank you.
So I anticipate the STIP process moving forward. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you for the questions. And who's doing number one, Terry? Is that Ben?
Yes, I'll be doing number one. Thank
Okay,
you.
Ben. So back to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Like Carlos mentioned, this agenda item is to go over the projects that received public comment, and more specifically, those that were not included, that are not included in the UDOT recommendation for funding. In a little bit more detail, we can answer questions. I believe there's region representatives here to answer any detailed questions as we go through these at whatever level anybody needs to. So there was a few projects here that this first page just shows the 3 projects that got public comments that are not included in the recommendations. And then we'll walk down through each one of those in a little bit more detail. So Ivan, if you'll scroll down, the first project was the I-215 Frontage Road project. That was the comment. There was a comment on that one by Senator Harper at the previous commission meeting. And so if you scroll down one more page, this is a map. Figure out the best way to show that. And anyone from Region 2, feel free to jump in at any point in time as I go through these descriptions. But this is a project that consists of a revision to the exit ramp on southbound I-215 to 4700 South. That includes some local road connections to 2700 West, as shown on this map here. This figure right here is actually from the environmental document. So this project does have an approved environmental document.
Ben, sorry,
Yep.
would you have Ivan kind of locate people, show where the complex is, where the new state office building is, just do some orientation of the roads?
Yeah, that's a good. This one's a good location because a lot of us are very familiar with this location. So there you can see the Calvin Rampton complex right there, and then the American Express building just a little ways to the north there.
Okay.
So this just gives kind of a general schematic of how what the project consists of. There's been, I believe it was in the public comment also, there's opportunity to, at whatever future time this project goes forward, to do this project in pieces if need be, with the local road connections versus the freeway facilities or ramp facilities. I believe that's how it was mentioned before. So just is there any questions on location or what the project consists of, or is there any additional comments that anyone from Region 2 wants to make on just the general location of the project before we talk a little bit about the ranking and some other factors?
Just a quick comment, Ben. This is Brian. So if you look at the cost estimate, I mean, we've been working with Taylorsville City on completing the environmental document and pricing this out. If you look at the cost estimate, the number was 20 million was the
20
total.
million.
So it's technically 15 million of the 20 is to do the frontage road or the ramps. The remaining 5 million are all of it, are the cost associated with connecting those side roads to the frontage road. So just wanted to clarify there.
Perfect. So if there's no other questions, we can always come back if anybody wants to come back to the map as I'm talking a little bit more about this one. So if you scroll down to the next page, this just the intent of this was just to tie this back to what we've been working on in the prioritization process. So it's very small, but this one was ranked number 41 on that prioritization list. So I just wanted to orient everybody to where this project was on the list. And then if you scroll down, well, I guess the last piece of that was just what Brian mentioned. The cost estimate was shown there, and then he did clarify that there is a split in how that cost estimate is broken up on the project. And I guess then the last thing that I'd want to mention is the reason that it is not included on the recommendations for TIF highway project on the UDOT list is, we talked about this last month, is when we developed the considerations, when we developed those recommendations, were that we had already had the TIF highway program. It was programmed out through 2024 and partway into 2025. And then given some of the uncertainty with how the funding was, the recommendations included some early environmental work on 2 projects and did not include any construction project recommendations at this time, knowing that those would be available in future cycles. And given that we were programmed out through 2024 into 2025, it's not it wouldn't be an immediate delay, if you will, on those projects. So let's see, there was There was one more thing I was going to mention on this one, and I'm blanking on it at the moment.
Yeah, one other comment, Ben, too. I think Senator Harper mentioned it last commission meeting, but it's been Taylorsville City's funding that they've used to date to pay for environmental document and what we've produced to date. So they've put an investment, upfront investment to the project.
I have
Thank
a question.
you, Brian, because that triggered. Go ahead. Yep.
Sorry, Ben. When we do this, we have, this happens like one date in time. And when this all happened, was the impact of moving the state office to the former American Express building? And I know they're expecting some impact because of the new temple as well. Had both of those elements been weighed into this at the time that we pushed the button on sort?
On the prioritization process, that's a good comment. I don't know for sure if the models, some of the travel demand models, would have been able to catch up with that specific change that quickly. But that's a really good comment, and probably something that we can definitely dig into for this next go around and clarify that.
Okay, thank you. I know that part of what the commission is supposed to do is help make sure that we're using the data, but things may happen between the time the data is presented and our conversation today. And I think those things need to be considered and weighed, given the amount of people now that will be using that. State people, you'll have neighbors. I think it's awesome.
Maybe if I could just add one comment to that is, the American Express building did have people in it previously, and it functions fine and so I think it's just a change to having state campus there, but there were people working in that facility previously, so it's not an addition of people. There were people working there before. And maybe just to clarify, for those of us who have worked in the areas of a new temple coming in, there's usually a big crush at the beginning, but that usually stabilizes over time, and it does not add a big traffic flow, depending on the area. But it's usually not a huge percentage increase in traffic. It's that initial crush that we usually end up planning for as it opens in that first couple of months, but past that, it has a tendency to level out. So just a little bit of perspective on those are two big things happening, the state campus and the temple, but I think just a little perspective on the traffic impacts of that maybe is helpful.
Very helpful. Thank you, Terry.
And
Question.
Go ahead.
So beside those two items that Donna mentioned and Terry mentioned, how could you justify bringing this project from the 41 ranking all the way to the 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yeah, as we mentioned, we did not include this in our recommendations for funding, given those considerations that we talked about and given where the ranking was on this project. And what Brian did trigger, what I was going to reiterate, is this one does have a completed environmental, which was the two projects that we did recommend. It was for environmental to set the stage for a future project. This one does have a completed environmental on it.
And maybe just to additionally clarify, the reason we're reviewing these three projects is because we gave you a recommendation last month, and then we had stakeholders present information about projects that we had not recommended. And so we wanted to be really clear, review the projects, and maybe the clarification on this one is we didn't recommend it previously. And after reviewing all the materials the last month and thinking through it, we are staying with that recommendation. We don't recommend it, but then the commission has the ability to fund it if they want to. But we just wanted to be clear about where we were with our recommendation in light of the public comment.
Thank you.
there any additional questions on this I-215 frontage road project that we could answer, or any additional discussion? All right. So then, Ivan, if you'll scroll down to the next. So this is a similar workflow here. There was a comment by Vineyard Mayor Fulmer last commission meeting on Vineyard Connector project. And so this is the same situation as the I-215 frontage road. It has a completed environmental document, and it is not included in our recommendations, but we wanted to go through some additional information on that project and answer any questions, same as we did on the last one. So if you scroll down, there's a fact sheet. This is part of some of the materials that the regions put together as they have projects that are on the ranked list as needed. I just want to note on this one, and if Region 3 wants to jump in to correct me, the public comment that the mayor provided, it was a modified scope from the project that's actually shown in the prioritization process. So it's it was a little bit slightly different than what was shown there. I believe it was a shortened version of that project, and this fact sheet represents that.
That's right, Ben. The project that you see shown on the map, the dotted line that goes to the interchange that's just below the I-15 shield, that's the Pleasant Grove Boulevard interchange. And the project that was ranked number 16 would take you from the beginning of the dark blue line at the bottom on SR 52, and it would take you all the way up to the interchange at Pleasant Grove Boulevard. And so the modified project, that full segment was prioritized at a cost of $116 million. The project that Mayor Fulmer described at the last meeting is shown in dark blue there, that goes to 1600 North, which is probably just shy of halfway of the original project. And that's much cheaper because we've already cleared the right of way, most of it, and there's no structures involved. So that project, it has a construction estimate of $15 million.
Rob, this is Eric with Region 3 Planning. In addition to that, the original project 16 was the full build, so 2 lanes in each direction with an active transportation path for that entire length. This project is only the one of those directional barrels, so the northbound or the southbound barrel of that improvement, providing 1 lane in each direction.
I think some of the considerations there is that even though this project is a subset of the project that was ranked number 16 on the list, it wasn't ranked as this project. That's one thing to just note here. I just wanted to clarify. Are there any questions on the project details or the location before I just show the ranking page again on this one?
Ben, Lou Kramer here. So good to be heard, maybe. I didn't even know we had a Linden Marina. Do we actually have boats there? I mean, Carlos is the sailor in the group, but I had no idea at the boat harbor.
Yeah, this is Jim. We do have a Linden Marina. It has, I've launched my boat there a number of times. It's just right there to the north of Vineyard there.
Huh. And there's traffic as a result of all that, Jim? And
yeah, I mean, it comes down 2000 north or 1600 north from both directions to get to that. So there is traffic there. It's used more and more too as the growth has happened out in that part of the county.
Yeah,
it's a private marina.
Yep, it is. And they still have the state. They'll have the state. They're doing the mussel invasion, washing and stuff like that. But it is it's kind of a private marina. The state has that station there to kind of spray the boats down.
Excellent. Well, I was at Vineyard yesterday. The growth there is phenomenal, and I absolutely support this. I think that's needed so much to ensure there's some balance in that part of Utah County. So thank you.
And I think
So
maybe
as
just,
I mentioned,
oh, I'm sorry,
go ahead,
Ben.
Rob.
I was just going
Go
to
ahead, Rob.
mention, I think from the mayor's perspective, from talking to her, I think I understand where they're coming from. They see this plan on our plan for the Vineyard Connector and the long range plan in phase 1, and they've been implementing their the development of their city to be consistent with the Vineyard Connector, and kind of trying to time things with this improvement. And I think that's what if you heard urgency in her voice, that's what that related to, is trying to marry our plan with their plan, and the timing of it.
So Ivan, if you'll scroll down a little bit, we just included the ranked list again to highlight. And like I mentioned, I did caveat this one that the project that received public comment was a modified or a portion of this ranked project. Just repeat that the Vineyard Connector does have the reason why that is not included in our recommendations is it does have an environmental document, and that we're programmed out through 2024 and into 2025, and we did not include recommendations for construction projects at this time. Is there any additional questions that we can answer, or anything on that project? I will note one thing before we move on to the next project, which is in the Transit Transportation Investment Fund, is that we did receive comments. We did receive multiple comments on the Provo Trail in the TIF active category, the Provo Canyon Trail, but that one is included in it is included in the recommended funded list. So we weren't planning on going through that in detail today unless there's additional comments that we need to talk about on that one.
And then maybe just to add, Eileen will be going through those comments tomorrow, and she will not be reading each comment because of the large number received, but she will be prepared to summarize and help you understand what some of the thoughts were as people made their comments on the Provo Trail.
Yeah, we did, because we received comments last meeting on that one, and we have received many additional comments on that project. So then if we move on to the last one on the list, at the last meeting, there was multiple written comments on the SR 224 BRT TTIF transit project. And so if you scroll down, there's, we took some information from some of the slides that you'll see tomorrow with the Region 2 report from some of their planning studies related to this SR 224 BRT project. And you can see on this is a bus rapid transit project from Kimball Junction to a future transit center near Bonanza Drive in 248. You can see the map there on the right. And then there's some bullet points on some other project information on the cost.
Mr. Chairman, may I just ask
Please.
May I just ask, Ben, what does that come out to per passenger? That just seems like an awful lot of money. I understand all the reasons for it, and I'm a big public transit guy, but I'm just curious. That is a lot of money. Any idea, Ben, how that breaks out, or that's
I-
probably not a very fair question, but
I don't have the per passenger information off the top of my head. We could get we could get some of that information and get it to you if you want it.
you know, I get asked that as commissioner. You know, is this really the best use of our money? And hey, we got wide open spaces out here in Utah. We're not New Jersey or whatever. Just be curious. And clearly, there's a benefit to all the mass transit we can use. But I know my son uses tracks, and he says there's just nobody on tracks these days because of obviously the COVID scare. So anyway, just a question: if it's readily available, it'd be, I think, useful for the commission just to have a feel for that. Thank you. And isn't it nice that I can talk again?
Yeah,
Don't respond to
absolutely.
that, Mr. Chairman. Don't respond to that. Thank you.
So Ben, was there any change in scope? How come we had 66 million originally and then now 50 million? What is the difference on that?
Is there anybody from Region 2 that could answer that on this slide? Do you know, Brian, if this is from what Grant was working on?
Yeah, this was, they went through their estimates and determined that they only needed the 50.3. I think one of the reasons for that was just an updated cost, as well as down on Bonanza Drive. I think some of the improvements for the transfer station, Park City is going to pay for that out of their own pocket.
Okay.
Well, and I guess one thing that I could, if you scroll down to the next slide, yeah, this one with the ranking, I'll give just, this was the project that was not included in our recommendations. And one of the reasons for that is that with the TTIF transit program, we targeted programming out to into the 2022 year on that revenue. And one of the limiting factors was with this one was the large amount of money on the request from the fund. You'll see there the 39 million, which is the TTIF portion, not including a match portion on this project. So that was one of the considerations. I mentioned considerations on the TIF funding recommendations. With the TTIF, we didn't have any program projects on this one. So in developing the recommendations on that one, some of the considerations we took into effect were this is the first time on this program. The input list or the project list relied on nominations from local governments or districts to this. So, and we had a short time frame on there. And so we didn't want to program or recommend funding too many years out. But since it was a new program, we felt like the 2022 time frame was a good target for how far to program out at this time frame. And so given those revenue projections in the 20 to 22 time frame, that was the pool of available money to work with on that. And so then based on looking at the rank list, this project was actually the only one on this rank list that is not included on the recommendations. And then I guess all that being said, I believe the commission did receive a letter on this project since the last meeting that has a modified request on this project, which we've included in this packet on the next page from Summit County. And just two main points of this letter, I believe, is that it modifies the request. If you scroll down a little bit, Ivan, to a $2.5 million TTIF request, and it offers an option to make any approval of that contingent on them receiving a federal build grant, which they have applied, or which I believe they have applied for this project. So this one's got a little bit, it's got this letter that comes into play also. And so I guess that was part of the discussion today is there anything that we can answer questions on with this, and any discussion related to the initial recommendations and then this letter also.
So the request is dropped from 39 million to 2.5 million based on the receiving the grant.
Yes.
Correct.
So, and this is Kevin, and basically this is, if they do not get the grant, we're not obligated any further, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, this is, if I could, Kevin and Nagi, just say this. And, you know, as we worked with the commission to develop the prioritization process around it, you know, we did not contemplate as part of that process, you know, maybe, you know, throwing some cards in and drawing two more, you know, drawing cards out and basically changing the scope, kind of changing the proposal in midstream. This proposal from the county, I think, is something that I would think the commission should consider, because the dollar value is lower, but the opportunity to be able to bring in federal money into the state, I think, is always a good thing. And this money would only be committed if they were successful on that build grant. So, you know, from my perspective, that's always good to bring money into the state. So I would suggest that the commission maybe consider this with the options that the county has provided.
How do we?
believe-
I'm sorry. How do we do that? How do we in this process? And how would we make the request or to consider this as a part of make this change? What's our process for doing that?
Jim, I would suggest that's the piece that we have in the rule, that it allows the commission to make a decision outside that straight 1, 2, 3 on the list, as long as you make that in a public meeting and you state your reasons for it. I think, you know, you might consider what I just said as a possible reason to do that. But if you did it in a public meeting and you wanted to approve it, you have the authority to do that.
Okay, sorry. And Kevin was going to say, Kevin, I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry.
Not a problem. I think that I've had several phone calls on this, and I think if they get the federal money, that might, you know, I think we're doing this the proper way. Get the federal money. I think we're not exposing ourselves any unless that comes. And I think this is a possible solution to assist them. I think what this will do in their grant is show that we've at least looked at this and we're willing to put some money into it once the federal comes. So I like what they're doing.
Yeah,
Personally.
Kevin, it's important for their application process to be able to show that commitment of local money.
Right. I know we've got letters from everybody that's done it, but the commitment puts it, and in light of what's going on in DC, they might stand a decent chance of getting that this year, this coming session. Maybe not, too. Who knows? But I think it puts them in a better position than they've had.
So Carlos, that means that, for example, in tomorrow's public meeting where we're taking votes, Kevin could make a motion out of what he just suggested right there that we could adopt, and then that change would be made with our plan.
Yes. And
Okay.
if Kevin wants us to prepare some draft language, we could do that too.
All right, support Kevin's recommendation.
Would you like that, Kevin?
I do. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so
Make
Terry-
sure let's do that so I don't overcommit us.
Well, Terry and Ben, will you guys take that action item to get some proposed language to the commissioner?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Ben, what is your crystal ball says about the receiving this build grant based on the performance we had?
Good luck with that, Ben.
I'm
Can I
always
answer that?
hopeful. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me answer that a little bit. It's been to the secretary's desk twice. So I don't think we're any further, I don't think we're, you know, that's where where it's gonna be steady. And, with the way things are in Washington, who knows?
Okay.
And when Kevin says that, you know, that's a term of art to the secretary's desk. So the secretary's staff spends a lot of time going through. You can imagine the amount of applications that they receive, and going through and trying to prioritize those applications. And they bring in just, you know, the top recommended projects. So I think what Kevin's saying is it's gotten close before.
Sure. No, now that they have a trade reduction from 39 million to 2.5 million and bring in that federal money, I really support this.
Well, I told them that if they had to have it all when it's just dead, they might as well wait. So I'm happy with what they've come back with. I think it has some viability. It isn't number one, but I think that down the road, if we're successful in bringing the Olympics and things, it could be advantageous to the state.
Sure.
I agree. It's a great example. We'd like to see it work. So, and appreciate their willingness to step up. So I'm supportive of it as well. Thank you.
This is Natalie. I'll just echo that. I feel great about the discussion, and I'm in alignment with all of you.
This is Wayne. I concur with that.
Well, Carlos, let us put the language together for tomorrow then, if you don't mind, please.
Thank you, Carlos.
Yes. Sorry, I was struggling with my mute button. It seems to be the common problem anymore. But yes, we'll get that to Kevin for his consideration.
Okay.
Thank you. So those were I believe those were the projects that received public comment that we did not have included in our recommendations. But I would like to make sure that there's any opportunity where there are any other projects or questions that we could answer. And hopefully there's not a reboot happening right now.
Oh, I was clicking. I was thinking it was my computer. Whew.
Is there any more questions from Carlos and from the Ben at this moment from the commission?
So what Ivan will talk about a little bit in this next item, I mean, just to kind of wrap this whole thing up, is we do have the TIF and TTIF recommendations on the agenda tomorrow for requested approval. And obviously this could be modified as this discussion on this one. But that's the reason for discussing it here. And the projects are then, those lists are what we presented last time minus these modifications. So. All right, well, if there's no further questions, I'll turn it over to Ivan to go over to item number 2 on the agenda.
Hey, thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
In the introduction, Carlos did a great job basically covering our number 2 item. I'm sorry, I don't have my camera turned on because I'm sharing screen. We'll do this real quick.
Sorry about that, Ben.
So what we just wanted to do, we were going to talk about the first STIP workshop. We introduced the funding and we proposed the program levels. After we proposed the program levels, the next month we proposed projects and we requested approval for the program values. And so that was last month. If you remember this fact sheet here, where we went through and talked about the difference between the projects that are or the programs that are managed at a project level versus those that are managed at a program level, these in the light orange, and the values then in the years that we're approving. So this month, what we're going to be requesting tomorrow is the transportation solutions, and I'm going to jump into tomorrow's fact sheet just so we can see what that's going to look like. So tomorrow we have the transportation solutions projects with the list of their projects. We have the transit investment fund, our TIF, with the associated project list that we talked about last month. And also our TTIF with the associated project list. So the request tomorrow will be to amend our current STIP to add these projects, the Transportation Solutions Program, the TIF and the TTIF funding, into the current year STIP. And just going to talk through real quick the reason why all of these programs are, all of these projects include our state funds, and the state funds become available July 1st. The federal funds become available October 1st. But where our transportation solutions project up here, we have a one-year program on these projects. And as Carlos mentioned, we like to advertise in the fall. If we wait until we receive approval in October to begin our transportation solutions projects, it would be difficult to try to get these projects advertised and able to be constructed in the following year, right? So next summer. So that's why we separate that. And historically, this is the same flow, but we ask for approval to amend our current STIP with our transportation solutions program and add these projects. And then next month, if we go back here, next month we will see the list of projects in our high volume, low volume, and the portion of our structures program, the replacement and rehabilitation program. We'll see those projects with the request to advertise or post the draft STIP for public comment. So we just wanted to kind of walk through that flow, that layout, so you know what the request will be tomorrow, and also to provide another opportunity for any project questions, whether it's the list of the transportation solutions, or even if it's any of the high volume, low volume, the structures, any projects that you've seen. If there's questions, we wanted to give you the opportunity here in this staff meeting to discuss those. So with that being said, I'll just
for my, this is Kevin. For my clarification, the bridges and things are the ones we reviewed last meeting that will be now on the list.
So in the commission meeting last month, in the actual commission, not the staff update meeting, the commission meeting last month, we had 5 different structures projects that were reviewed or submitted to the commission and approved last month. Those would not be listed as new projects in this next round, because we had funding in the structures program. We were able to approve and then authorize funding on those projects, and those projects have already begun underway.
Thank you. That clarifies that for me.
Okay. There's nothing more.
Ivan?
Yep.
Ivan, Carlos, where can if the commissioners wanted to look at this tonight, I'm sure that's probably top of mind. Where would they find this?
So the easy one would be, if I'm going to just navigate back to the transportation. So under our UDOT homepage, under the Transportation Commission, if you are looking for the list of the projects that we've talked about or the programs, either one of those two that we talk about, if you were looking to see what's going to be presented, right here, the proposed projects that we've talked about so far, the information that Heather has provided, or here under our meetings, agendas, and audio. And Heather has our agenda meetings posted here. And there's also links into our items. So under our program development, you'll see here's our Transportation Solutions Project, the TIF and the TTIF projects there. and this link that will launch our materials of what's being produced. This is just that packet, and it's going to be several pages down through all of our other actions. Here we go. But here's our list then that we'll be presenting tomorrow at the commission.
Just a point of clarification, Ivan or whoever, as we look at the transportation solutions, that is different from all the others. This is not a prioritized list. This is just an inclusive list, right?
Correct. So you'll see the regions had gone through and included their region priorities in the list of their project's name. So you can see if to help identify what their top projects were. Yeah, that's where I'd leave that.
Ivan, maybe let's randomly pick a region commissioner to put them on this, a region director. I promoted a region director there. Put them on the spot to talk about how do they come up with their recommendations. And so, Lisa, how do you do it in Region 1? You're welcome.
Sorry. We through the year have our groups, traffic and safety, maintenance, come up with a list of projects and needs. So some of them are assets. Obviously some are safety projects, some are choke point projects that you just see out there where we may need a right turn pocket, things like that. So they're developing their project list over the year. They come to our leadership team with their lists prioritized. And then the leadership team all runs through a process where we go through and score the projects. And then we have our list developed, and we pull from that to make a recommendation to the commission for what we would like to fund and move forward with.
And then do you discuss it in your region workshop meetings?
Yes, we do. Yeah, so we went through that in the STIP workshop meeting we had for the region. We go through it with Commissioner Barlow and make sure that there's nothing that we've been missing or that he's been hearing about that we need to address with those funds.
Thank you.
That's the basic gist of it.
So, Commissioner, I would say that, each region probably has, I'm going to guess, 5 to 10 times more projects that they would like to get to than what you see them putting forward here.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate your help working through our project selection program values.
Thank you.
Ben, are we ready to move on to item 3?
Yes, we're ready to move on to the statewide airport improvement plan update.
I don't know if Rob was going to start. Rob White's going to start this off, or it's going right to Jared. I'm not sure how they had schemed on this.
It's going to Jared.
I did pass off, Rob.
Nice. Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Carlos and commissioners. Glad to talk about the ACIP for the next 5 years and a little update on how we actually get. Yes,
Jared,
sir.
can I interrupt you? Just turn on your camera if you would, just so people can feel like they're with you. Thank you.
Okay.
There
Here we
he
go.
is.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
So I apologize if I'm going to look this way and
Uh-huh.
you're going to see this way because I'm actually using 2 screens to do this.
It's all good.
just so I know where I am on the PowerPoint. But wanted to talk a little bit about the 5-year plan and how we get to that. Actually, what's the process of getting to this 5-year plan and how projects actually get there. Ivan, do you want me to drive, or are you going to drive the PowerPoint there?
Your call. I've got the PDF up, but I'll stop presenting and you can start if that works.
Either way, if you just want to scroll down, that's fine. Okay, so wanted to really start with the first steps, and this step will be changing hopefully in the next year. Right now, our airport sponsors work very closely with an engineer of record, and they put together a draft development plan for the airport. And what that is it's a subset of a master plan, of a 20-year plan, and it includes what's called an airport layout plan. So they take a good look at that and they say, you know, where do we want our airport to go in the next year, 5 years, 10 years? And so they put a list of projects together and they submit that list to the Division of Aeronautics, and then we share it with the FAA. Now, this is the note. Once we have the aviation development strategy in place, that's a statewide development plan, and it does 3 things for us. It gives us an economic impact baseline. So we'll be able to measure, you know, for every project, what was the economic impact of that project? Did it move the needle up? How much did it move the needle up? So that's the first thing that the development strategy gives us. The second thing is a needs assessment. So rather than, well, I shouldn't say rather than, part of the airport development plan is recognizing the needs for safety needs for meeting a specific airport category, needs for meeting business or increased business capacity. 2 examples of that would be Heber Airport. It has, part of its needs assessment is a longer runway, or a wider runway, I should say, and a thicker runway to accommodate more safely the heavy jets that fly in there. Another example would be Manti, who just got its first VLJ, or very light jet, and they're looking to lengthen their runway to accommodate a second jet. So those are the kind of things that come in the needs assessment. And then finally, an ROI, or return on investment optimizing plan, to really say, you could do all of these projects, but here are the projects that are the most bang for your buck. And that's going to lead our first step in this process beginning next year. So Ivan, if you'll just scroll down. A little too far. Maybe I should take the yoke on this one, Ivan. Do you mind? Okay. I'm going to present. Oh, let me do this. Sorry, guys. Let me jump in here presenting. I'm going to do screen 2. There you go. Okay, great. So okay, great. So there are 2 types of requests that we get. The number 1 type is planned, and that comes from the airport development plans. They cover a wide range of years and a wide range of items, from pavement to equipment to buildings. Some of the plan requests are initiated by the individual airport. Some are initiated by us because we see a need that the airport has. Some are initiated by the FAA. And I'll give you an example of a project that was initiated by the FAA was Green River Airport. The FAA had some money to spend, and so they redid all the pavement at Green River. That was at their request, and we accommodated them. So that's really the first type of request we get. The second type is unplanned. These are emergencies. They could be minor fixes. It could be we were snow plowing and hit a few lights, to a plane crashed and marred the pavement, or a plane that was too heavy landed and marred the pavement. And I'll give you an example of that. Tiger Woods actually landed at Dutch John a couple of years ago, and his aircraft was so heavy it put ruts in the runway and in the taxiway. Now he had to pay for that, but that's one of the things that might be an emergency request. Smaller things are change orders on a project, unplanned requests, where we get through a project and maybe we're about 80% through and we realize, oh, we didn't buy enough material. Or maybe we're 20% through and we realize, oh, the ground here is not what we thought it was. We're going to have to make a change order. A good example of this is St. George. So St. George is a good example of an emergency funds used, unplanned. You know, they built that brand new runway, brand new airport down there, and a short 7 years later, they had to rip up the entire thing because of blue clay. That was all emergency funding. That was all just emergency FAA funding that finished off that new runway. Even the unplanned requests get incorporated into the plan. We don't often change the first year of the ACIP. Matter of fact, we like to say that's set in stone. It's usually the second or third year where an unplanned request actually becomes part of the plan. Okay, so once we have the requests, the Division of Aeronautics meets with the FAA Airports District Office, the ADO. And essentially we go through the requests and we kind of do an initial weeding out. Yes, we like this one. No, that one's just crazy. Maybe this one might be. Let's see where the budget finds out. And that's essentially the meeting we have. It's an all-day meeting. We'd like to do it about once a quarter, but we at minimum do it at least once a year. Then we go back to the sponsors, the airport sponsors and the engineers of record, and we inform them of our decisions, and we give them an opportunity to provide feedback and say, well, you know, we'd like you to really reconsider saying no to this project, or we appreciate you approving this project. Might we have a little bit more? And that conversation continues on, but we do allow them to provide feedback.
Jared, this is Wayne. I have
sure.
a question.
Sure.
On that St. George runway redo, what exactly did you have to do to rip that up, and then you put some new sort of base under the runway? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. The initial runway was budgeted for a 7-foot deep base. So they dug down 7 feet and engineered the base from there up. In the process of doing that, they learned that there was blue clay much further down than 7 feet. At the time, they didn't have it in the budget to dig down to 17 feet, which they should have done. So they had to continue with the project based on the budget that had already been locked in. And like I said earlier, that first year is set in stone. So they finished the project knowing that they would probably have problems. And sure enough, problems arose, and they had to dig the runway out again, dig down to 17 feet, and re-engineer the entire base from 17 feet to the surface, and then lay the new runway. And that's what we have now. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Jared, this is Natalie. I have a question as well. Did they estimate how costly that was? In other words, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I want to say it was $25 million on the federal side, and probably another 7 to 10 on St. George's side. They will get reimbursed for that though from the FAA. Yeah,
that's, clearly, I mean, Nagi, I'm sure you have opinions there, because it's not just the extra cost of construction, but the cost of time and whatnot for the customers.
It was devastating for the people. Just wait until the runway is finished, because there's a lot of usage of that airport right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
It reminds me of what happens when you don't follow science and best practices.
Well, but Jared is right, though. They had that budget for the first year, and they approached the FAA. They said, no, that's it. Go proceed with the way it is budgeted, and then come back whenever you need it. But you're right. We know about our geology. We build foundation deep to 17 to 20 feet some areas, because that is how deep that the blue clay goes. And unfortunately, they recognized it right at the get-go. But the FAA said, no, go proceed and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah. And luckily, you know, you talk about the impact on lives and travel. Luckily, Cedar City is not far away. And Cedar City took most of that air traffic. A
Yes.
lot of people moved their planes from St. George to Cedar City. All of the commercial flights moved from St. George to Cedar City, which was, in hindsight now, which was great, because Cedar City needed that extra capital because they're under their own runway project today. They're finishing up in another month, but they're under their own runway project today and closed and not able to bring in that revenue. So that boost was good for them. It was a good trade-off. Good trade-off.
Yeah.
So after these initial decisions made and feedback is provided, we get together in what we call a joint planning committee, and it's the aeronautics staff, it's the FAA Airports District Office, and then we meet with every individual airport one-on-one and their engineer of record to go over the decisions, to go over the budgets, to talk about real material cost and labor costs. We do this twice a year at the Utah Airport Operators Association conference, and we do get into the justification of some of the projects that were requested, whether they meet federal eligibility standards. I'll give an example of that. We used to pay for what's called taxi lanes. Now, a taxi lane is different from a taxiway because a taxiway leads directly from the runway to a parking spot, what's called an apron. A taxi lane leads from the apron and it might go down 2 rows of hangars. So it's really pavement that gives access to private hangars. And so the FAA came up with a rule that they would no longer fund pavement that did not access public areas, public use space. And so many of the taxi lanes were being defunded. So that's a justification debate, right? That's an eligibility debate with FAA funds. And that's where we have these discussions, is at the UAOA conferences. We reach a soft agreement. We walk away from those meetings coming to an agreement of, okay, this is what we intend to do. But then we come to the hard agreements later as the FAA goes through their budget, what's been authorized by Congress, how much state apportionment we are calculated to be given, how much entitlement each airport is calculated to be given, and if there are any discretionary funds available. Discretionary is one of those things that we can compete for, but we need to be very, very ready for. So once the FAA is done with that, or I should say in parallel with that process, any airports or projects that are not federally eligible, aeronautics does the exact same process. We sit down, we go through the budget, we see what we can and should fund. And then we do kind of a brainstorming where we have even 2 or even 3 meetings with the FAA and local sponsors to make sure that the sponsor can come up with their 5% match. Because while the FAA is willing to put down 90% of a project, the state has to come up with another 5% that we're budgeting. And then the airport or the city has to come up with 5%. And that can be a difficult thing sometimes for a city with a small airport. A good example of this kind of budget brainstorming is the new Provo terminal, where the FAA was absolutely committed to building a new apron to the tune of several $million, but required the city to pay for the terminal, which was not federally eligible, but it was a $9 million terminal project. And the city had to come up with that money and figure it out. And how do they come up with a match to go? Because The FAA wouldn't fund an apron without a terminal, and the city didn't have the money for the terminal and the apron match. So that's where you get into this kind of juggling of budgets and brainstorming and where's the money coming from and how do we get it and who's spending what. CIP that we present to y'all. It's a living document. It's never really finished. It's always plan A. But as you have seen, and as I have shown you in graphs and in numbers, year one is always kind of, we have 49 projects, and then year two is 44. And then year three is 22, and then year four is 18. And you think, well, why is that? Because after year two, you're really waiting to see, is this justifiable? Is it eligible? Do we need it yet? Can we push it back? Where are we spending our money? Is it the best place to be spending our money? So the ACIP is always very fluid. It also fluctuates. We get bids that come in too high. We get just a particularly bad winter is rough on pavement or on snow removal equipment, which is calculated how much Utah gets based on how many airports we have, how many operations those airports have, the population demographics of Utah, and the amount of pavement we have. And that gives us a set amount that we just are dedicated, that apportionment. Second is discretionary. And this is kind of left over from what maybe an airport in California failed to use. And so that gets turned back into the FAA and everybody can compete for it. And then finally, there are entitlement funds, which are broken down into primary and non-primary entitlements. Primary entitlements are $1 million a year. Non-primary entitlements are $150,000 a year. And if you'll remember, I've been here for 3 years. So just 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I brought a project to you that we paid $1 million for Moab, just straight state money, $1 million. And we built a couple of hard stands in Moab. And by doing that, we got Moab from the non-primary $150,000 a year to the primary $1 million a year because they were able to bring in more aircraft, larger aircraft, and more passengers. And so they cleared that threshold between non-primary and primary. Now, in the 2 years that we've done that, obviously we got our money back through Moab because now they're getting $1 million every year from the federal government. All of these monies come from the Aviation Trust Fund, which is similar to the Aeronautics Restricted Fund. The Aviation Trust Fund is fueled by aviation fuel tax revenue, and so is the Aeronautics Restricted Fund. The lion's share of our budget comes from aviation fuel tax and then aircraft registration fees, and that's where those money come from. That's the end of the presentation. I am prepared to go through some of the ACIP numbers if you'd like, but other than that, I'll answer any questions.
Jared Nagizinati, welcome back. Good to see you. Two questions. Earlier you said about the Green River Airport that FAA paid to asphalt to pave their runway. How did they pick that airport particularly? What was the selection committee?
The pavement, they picked that airport because of the pavement condition, particularly. They needed to do an entire rehab. The FAA doesn't like to see pavements fall below a certain PCI, pavement condition index. That airport had a crosswind runway that was not eligible, but a main runway that was. And the local sponsor really wanted to keep the crosswind runway, but the FAA did not. So the FAA chose it because there was an agreement reached that the sponsor would pony up the money for the crosswind, and then the FAA would fund for the rehabilitation or the complete removal and repavement of the primary runway. And because that agreement could be reached was the reason they chose to do that.
Next question. You beautifully defined the taxiway and taxi lane. So who pays for the taxi lanes then? The airport, the local airport, or the state, or a combination of those two funds?
It can be a combination of the local airport and the state. We have a limitation on how close to a private hangar we will pave, because the owner of the hangar should be responsible for paving the 15 feet in front of his hangar. So that 15 feet in front of his hangar is kind of the line we draw. And the federal line is 35 feet. I think they extended it to 50, but I think it's still 35. And what we'll end up seeing sometimes on a taxi lane is that if we are going to chip in for paving that area, it's a very narrow stretch right down the middle between two rows of hangars. And so we'll reach an agreement that maybe we pay for 10 or 20% of that project rather than the normal 90-10 that we're used to. But we expect airports and hangar owners to be able to keep up with their own pavements and their own access to the airport.
My last question, Jared, COVID-19, what kind of effect has in your department and your income coming in?
Thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
I am so proud of the aviation system we have in Utah and the way we handle our money and the way we project our budgets. Right now, if I sell $540,000 more worth of aviation fuel tax revenue, we will hit our budgeted projection numbers. We'll hit them. So even with all the planes that have stopped flying, we will feel about $1 million hit in the total fuel sales, total fuel aviation fuel tax revenue, but we project low, a conservative low when we're designing our budget, and that saved us. We will hit our projections. That saved us. Now we'll see a measured decrease in what we would have seen. Like last year, we got 6.6 million. The year before that, we got 6.4 million in revenue. This year, we will hit our projection of 5.7. And that's usually what we project is $5.7 million in revenue. We should hit that. The reason we should hit that, two things. One, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints brought home 40,000 missionaries on charter flights from the Philippines, from Africa, from South America. We had planes and airlines that had no business being in Salt Lake, and they're all charter. So we got 9 cents per gallon on every gallon of fuel they bought to fly home. So that helped a lot. The second thing that helped was commercial pilots that were not at work started flying their planes around, started renting planes and flying them around the state just to go have fun. And that helped buoy our fuel sales. Is these guys just, they were allowed, the FAA told us that we had to keep airports open during the pandemic, that we could not close them for any reason other than safety. So we kept the airports open and people were allowed to use them because if you're, the only one in an airplane, you're perfectly socially distanced at 10,000 feet. So that helped. And the fact that as commercial aviation plummeted, and I'll use that word, business aviation saw a spike in both people trying to, and I'll use this word, evacuate out to more comfortable places to quarantine, perhaps. But we did see a spike in business aviation and then general aviation. So it buoyed our revenue.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, Luke Kramer, may I ask? Jared, excellent presentation. You're very knowledgeable. I had no idea about many of these things. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And just two questions. The Manti, when you said make room for a bigger jet, is there commercial flights going outside of Manti, or they just happen to have a jet that's housed there now?
They just happen to have a jet that's housed there, and we call it a VLJ, a very light jet. It's a very small jet aircraft. They are looking to get another tenant at the airport with a slightly larger aircraft, which means that they would need a slightly longer runway to accommodate that aircraft on the very hot summer days of Utah, high hot desert conditions.
Right.
And they are looking, they've asked us, they've asked the legislature to help fund the lengthening of the runway, but it is a major project. So we have to be very calculated in how we go about doing it.
Yeah, for one new jet. The second question is just how's the, broad question, but how's the new Salt Lake Airport going to impact you specifically and the responsibilities you have? The opening of the new Salt Lake Airport.
Well, we're still on time. I have been regularly engaged with all of the technical advisory committees for the airport project, as well as the airport advisory meetings, the board meetings. We are going to open on September 15th on time. The decision has been made that rather than opening on September 15th and then waiting a while to keep the half of the old terminal operating, we will close the doors and just demolish it, start tearing it down. And that's because of the reduced number of passengers and the reduced number or the reduced demand on quantity of gates, so places aircraft can park. And because of that reduced demand, it allows us to tear the old terminal down all at once and continue building the new phases more rapidly. So it'll take about 2 years off of the whole project and save about $300 million.
Wow.
So that's really how COVID has affected the new airport.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's always silver lining in every tragedy in life.
That's right. You have to smile at something.
You have to.
Any other questions I can answer for anybody?
Good job and thank you and good to see you.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank
Yes,
you,
ma'am.
Jared.
Thank you.
Well, now the last item on the agenda, I'm going to guess may not be as fun, but I would submit it's as important. And I don't know if Ben are you going to start this or are we going to go to Lyle?
Lyle's going to do this one. So yeah, if Ivan, if you can switch back over and bring up the information that Lyle's going to speak through.
Carlos, it was fun yesterday and it's going to be even fun more today. So don't worry.
Thank you. Thank you for the optimism.
All right, Ivan, if you could please go to the proposed update. There we are. Perfect. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So as Carlos mentioned earlier, the State Infrastructure Bank is just over 20 years old. And initially, it wasn't well capitalized. It's only within the last 5 or so years that we've really become, the fund has actually started to have a material difference in transportation infrastructure funding in Utah. And so last year, the legislature made some amendments to the State Infrastructure Bank statute, basically changing the name to State Infrastructure Bank, and also asked us to develop a prioritization process for you to go through in prioritizing loan applications. One of the ironic things about that is that it is very rare that we ever have more than one loan application at any given time that we bring to you. And so in the event that we ever did have a situation where we had multiple loan applications and more requests for funding than we have funding, then this will be a very helpful tool for you to make decisions. So this year, the legislature also amended it yet again. There were one significant thing that happened that isn't on this particular fact sheet is that last year they had included $10 million for MIDA, and this year they took it out and did something different with it. And so you'll notice that that will not be on the fund balance sheet that I present to you shortly. So there are 4 major changes in this year's law. Number one, they kind of made it more flexible, the use of SIB funding to, you look at that first bullet point, they modified the definition of an eligible transportation project. It used to say improve parking facilities that support an intermodal regional transportation purpose. Now it just says to construct or improve parking facilities. The second thing that they did was they modified the eligibility of transportation projects to include an economic development initiative on the part of a political subdivision. The third thing they did was they clarified the prioritization process used to be state-centric, and now it includes political subdivisions. So the project can benefit not just the state, but also local governments and counties. And then one of the things that will become very apparent later on today and tomorrow is that the term used to be statutorily restricted to no later than 10 years. And that went into effect this past week, the statute increasing it from 10 to 15 years, and then capped an interest addition to 0.5% above the bond market rates. And so to that end, what we identified is that despite the fact that the law went into effect allowing a 15-year term, the way that the rule and the law are worded, the existing rule that said 10 actually was compliant because it says up to or no later than. And so the rule will change, that we're proposing will comply with the new statute once it becomes effective. And then we've also, as part of this rule, developed a prioritization framework that we hope will allow you to make fact-based decisions based upon 6 criteria that were identified in the statute. And so we'll go through that. Ivan, if you could go down a little bit more, please. Even further to the next page. So this is it's in your materials. I just provided a reference to the actual bill that was passed and highlighted the areas that I just identified in the bullet points. You can keep going down, Ivan. So that's for your reference, just so that you can see where it happened and confirm that the language is there. And then we'll go to the actual proposed rule. You know, we've had an existing rule for quite some time now, and this rule basically brings into effect the prioritization process and increases the term from 10 to 15 years. Originally, it was fairly long. We met every week for months. And what you see is a very simple, concise rule. And it was not without the amount of time that we invested in this does not reflect how easy it's going to look. Let's put it that way. Ben has a nice way of putting it that I don't remember how to say it. All right. So the rule basically, we start, and one other thing that I wanted to identify is that I've been in front of the commission, I don't know, about a dozen times over the last 20 years with rule review. And there's 2 kinds of rules, right? There's the UDOT rules that we need to bring in front of the commission for your review. And inevitably, one of you asks, well, are we supposed to do anything with this? And the answer is no, that we're just supposed to bring it for your review. this is actually a Transportation Commission rule. This is your rule that we are proposing that you adopt so that we can help with the State Infrastructure Bank funding and prioritization. So this is for your review and hopefully for your approval to move forward. All right, let's go down, Ivan. So first, we always start with an authority and a purpose. We've identified that in the statute. Some really simple definitions. Commission is you, the department is us. And then we go through and basically have a flow, and stop right there, Ivan, about how the process works. And basically a public entity applies. And Ivan, do you have access? You're on the internet, right? Obviously. Can you go to the Transportation Commission website, please? And let's go to the Commission Policies, Roles, and Guidelines link. And then go down and you'll see State Infrastructure Bank application. So this is how potential applicants apply for loans from the State Infrastructure Bank. If you'd like to click on that. The application is online. They provide their name, contact information, how much they're requesting, the term length, and then what kind of project it is, because the statute identifies certain kinds of projects that are eligible. Keep going, Ivan. And then description, their number that we would transfer funds should it be approved. And then we go through the criteria that are identified in the statute and provide the applicant with the opportunity to give their best answer to how they may meet those criteria, which will then help us in the prioritization process. And we'll get on that. I just wanted to identify that we already have, it's been live. We've been using it for some time. And that is also an answer to Commissioner Van Tassel's question is, how do they know about it or how do they access it? It's right here on the Transportation Commission website. And in fact, if you go back, Ivan, back to the previous page, go down to the very bottom. Carlos asked us to provide this a couple months back, and this is the actual fund balance. And that first piece there, you can see the capitalization early on from like 98 to 2012. We had very little money in the fund, $3.5 million. And then you'll see over the last 5 years, they started capitalizing it fairly robustly up until this last year when they moved the MIDA money out. And if you go down a little bit more, Ivan, this is what I use to take the numbers that will provide the balance and obligation history. And so I take this from finance and then put what we're doing or not doing or what's happened in the interim and provide that on the single sheet for you. But this is for your information, and you can access this at any time through your Transportation Commission website. Ivan, let's go back to the rule. All right, so we just talked about the application. It's on our website and it has its own Go link, udot.utah.gov, Go SIB. And then we talk about standards. Again, a rule just basically says how we are going to deal with things that are outside the department, like applications from entities, eligible public entities requesting loans from the fund. And just keep going down, Ivan. Talks about how we calculate the interest rate. It's as of the date that we receive a completed application. And then it talks about when a public entity can begin repaying the infrastructure loan, the statute basically identifies two ways: when a highway is open to the public, or when the project is completed. They can pay in monthly, quarterly, or yearly installments. My understanding is that 100% of the entities have chosen to pay in yearly installments. And then one of the things that we added was that I've noticed that some of our loans, once you've approved them, they tend to hang out for a while. And what we've done in the rule is say, hey, you have 180 days to get to financial close, or you need to come back to the commission and ask for an extension. And the commission can extend it, and or depending on the way the rates have changed in the intervening 180 days, they may choose, you have the opportunity to decide whether or not you want to update the terms of the loan to the current market prevailing rates. But again, it's all your flexibility. All right, Ivan, keep going, please. And then we get into the prioritization process and the prioritization framework. First one, obviously, is do we have any money in the fund? And then we ask them to provide evidence that the project will, does the project have any economic benefits to the state of the political subdivision? If they were to receive the loan, would it advance the project? I heard someone earlier say, if there's a good project, we want to do it now instead of later. And so we asked, does this help? Does the SID funding help advance, accelerate this project? Next is, does the project help foster public-private partnerships, or is there any private investment involved in this project? After that, it's, is there any benefit from this loan and your project to the state highway system? Next, Ivan, can you go down a little more, please? And then how much skin do they have in the game? What percentage of the SID loan is part of their overall project budget? And then the next one is, does it help with intermodal connectivity, pedestrian, mass transit, non-motorized transportation, active transportation, et cetera? And then you get to decide if there's any other questions about that particular loan or project that you deem appropriate. So then we provide a score, and basically it's binary. Does it or does it not have any of these elements that we just talked about, the 6 elements? And we'll provide a score for you. And if it's a tie score, then we'll have tie differentiators. Like if you look there at S, is there one project that has a higher percentage of private participation or private funding than the other? And we'll let you know what that looks like so that you can make a decision based on those criteria or the extent of those criteria for each project. And we'll talk about, I'll show you that in just a second. The last thing again is that the commission always has discretion. You can approve a request for a loan or assistance ahead of another request with a higher prioritization score for a good cause as you determine in a public meeting. All right, Ivan, let's keep going. So this is the proposed prioritization framework. It's those 6 point things, those 6 criteria that are identified in the statute. And let's go down and just see how that will look to the applicant. we just basically ask it in terms of a question. Does the proposed transportation project encourage, enhance, or create economic benefits to the state or the political subdivision? And if it's yes, they get a point. If it's no, they don't get a point. And we had some internal dialogue about, do we make the determination, or do we say that the public entity hasn't demonstrated sufficiently or has demonstrated, which will allow some flexibility for them to come back and clarify their request if we didn't understand well enough. So each of those 6 criteria have a yes or no question that gets them a point or doesn't get them a point. Basically asking, does the project create those conditions that have been identified as a priority in the statute? And you'll see there on number 5, we asked what percentage of the total project cost does the proposed loan amount represent as a potential tie differentiator. All right, Ivan. I think that's the end. It is. So, what questions do you have?
Hey, this is Kevin. No questions, but thank you. Very well done, and it answers a lot of the issues that I've had with this program. I think it gives us enough structure and things that we can answer to anybody that asks us questions, how the process works. I think this is a great improvement.
Thank you.
This is Wayne. I concur with Kevin's comment.
This is Natalie. I concur with Carlos' comments about the airport being really interesting and sexy, and administrative rules as being kind of like get through it, but it seemed like it's good structure. So thank you, Lyle.
Sorry about that, Al.
This is Donna. I too think this is, I love having this scoring process. At what point, or maybe this is going backwards just a little bit, but how do we answer the question that this is available rather than going to commercial lending?
Not a bit. Are you on a meeting?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Why, so at SUU, we're always concerned about how we conflict with other entities. So I realize that legislative action has helped fund this account, but how do we answer the question, aren't you competing with commercial business?
In terms of commercial lending?
Yes.
Well, I believe that the state infrastructure bank was set up specifically to provide a more streamlined process for local governments to access infrastructure funds. A lot of time, it takes more time to go for a bond. B, it's a lot more costly to go out to market for a bond. And this process and several others, there's another entity that's national called the Build America Bureau, and they have a huge program that provides, and in fact, we're hoping to combine some of this with what they do. They offer, they hire consultants to do all the paperwork and then do 50% of the prevailing rate. So they actually lose money on the loans so that they can do infrastructure. And this is one of kind of a medium response to that, and that is we provide access to transportation infrastructure funding that is quick, low cost, and sometimes I think like Vineyard, they did both. They got some from us, and then they also went out to market as well and bonded for the difference. So you'll see some people using hybrid approaches, but I hope that answers your question. It's the intent of the State Infrastructure Bank is to be a low-cost, easy access to infrastructure funding.
That is helpful. As I recall, we have this rule talks about paying back annually. And I think we have one out there that's not expected to pay back for a period of 5 years. Are we going to renegotiate that to work within this rule, or do we just let that go?
That was under a previous, that was under the previous law.
Uh-huh.
And so the law that's changed, all future ones will be in conformance with that, which is part of the reason why tomorrow, this next piece that I'm talking about with the Mid-Bell City loans, they would like to use the ability of the new statute to have a 15-year term, but until the rule's in effect, they can only do 10. So that's
Okay.
what we'll start with. And then we hope that you will feel comfortable enough to also provide a contingency for them to convert to 15 when the rule complies with the law.
And then my last
Lyle,
question. Oh, sorry.
can I just clarify one thing too, just to make sure, because I think in Commissioner Law's question, as far as the paying back annually, there is a provision in both the code and the rule that, as far as when the payment commences, the payment it's allowable for the payment to commence after project completion. So there can be a period of time after you take the loan out that you don't make initial payments. But I think what the quarterly and annually portion of the rule is once you do start making payments, then that's the allowable schedules. So I just to clarify, I think that may be what your question was.
Thank you. That is helpful. And then if we find that this program is so successful, particularly now while we're maybe talking about advancing projects and helping to get things go, is there a way for us to request more funds to capitalize the fund?
Carlos, do you want to answer that?
This is Linda. I could help out a little bit. So under state code, I'll do the camera so that maybe you can see me. So under state code, you would have the choice of capitalizing the SIB bank yourself out of funds that are appropriated for the commission to prioritize. You could choose to do that yourself. Additionally, the legislature could choose to make more funds available in the SIB.
Great. Thank you. You have an Emmy award behind you.
Oh, I usually turn my camera this way so it's not so distracting.
Well, okay. We'll have to talk about that.
Go ahead, Linda. You can't.
Award for all the zero fatalities programs. Yay.
Very cool. Very cool.
What other questions do you have about the rule or the prioritization process?
Lyle, good morning. This is Nagi. Welcome back.
Hi.
Good to see you.
It's good to be seen.
I have 3 or 4 questions, if you don't mind, please. First, when you get the application from the local government entities or the political subdivision, what kind of credit rating you're expecting from this application?
The statute requires that the city or the local public entity provide a dedicated revenue source. And so that be an RDA, or they identify tax or tax increment. The other thing that we have in our contracts is that like the collateral is their B&C road funds. So if they failed to pay using the dedicated revenue source that they've identified in their application and in the loan, then the statute and the contract enables UDOT to withhold their B&C road funds until they either pay up or until the debt is satisfied.
Oh, you answered the 3 questions in one answer. You're so wonderful. Thank you. On the portion of the private partnership with the public sector, what do you expect from the private entity? What if they fail to perform their obligation?
Well, the State Infrastructure Bank is a lending facility for eligible local public entities. So we do not do any loans to private entities. And in fact, we've had some local public entities try to make their revenue, their repayment source, private entities, and we have resisted going to contract or financial close with that because our agreement, our contract is with a local public entity, and you and I cannot contract to have Carlos sell his car.
Sure.
So, and that's part of the reason why we have the deobligation request tomorrow with St. George, is that the funding source was the private property owners selling their property after the project, and that was not something that we were comfortable with because they're not party to the agreement.
Okay. That was exactly my exact question. I wanted to follow up on that. You're encouraging the public sector to do the innovation partnership with the local private companies, but then you are not encouraging to be loan dependent on them. Okay.
Yeah, and so like for example, the two loans that we are discussing tomorrow with Midvale do have significant amounts of public-private partnership and private investment. So they're bringing quite a bit to the table in terms of private investment, and the cities are asking for funding to build parking structures so that will enable additional vertical office space, create jobs and economic development. So that is kind of a really good example of how public-private partnerships and private investment mixed with state infrastructure bank funding meets that criteria.
And my last question, we have already specified the maximum term of 15 years for the loans. But what about the maximum amount that the entity can borrow? Do we have any kind of statute on that one? As much as we have money?
There is not a limit statutorily. We in the prior guideline, we had a requirement. Again, it was a guideline not to loan out more than 25% of the fund to any single entity. And then the legislature funded and directed UDOT to provide $14 million to MIDA, which blew that guideline out of the water. So we are going to provide you with that information and then let you use your judgment to determine whether or not it's okay for somebody to keep coming back to the well or not. And sometimes the legislature directs us to provide funding, and it's out of our purview.
Sorry, but I just remember one more question that I think is important for me and for the commission. The regular loan, if you go borrow the loan, they charge you points, they charge you appraisal fee, they charge you closing costs. Do we have any of those fees attached to borrowing this particular SIB money?
No, we don't. The statute allows us to recover administrative costs, which we've chosen not to do. It's part of my job to administer this fund, and so that's how we're paying for it. But the statute does provide a 0.5%, 50 basis points above the prevailing rates available to the state, bond rates available to the state. So with the rule, we're going to follow the statute and tack that 50 basis points on to every loan, and then that is what is used to help recapitalize the fund and cover expenses.
So you don't pretty much require any kind of proof that the project they're going to be doing is appraised to the value of the money they're going to borrow?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you guys ready for Lyle to move on to Lyle? The loan request is the next step here, right? Or did you cover? Okay.
Ivan, would you like to go to let's go to the fund balance sheet. So from my days back in the corridor preservation realm, I adapted what we used to share with you then to the State Infrastructure Bank. And so it's been a couple months since last October since I came before you, and we've had some things happen. So the balance forward is about $20.9 million. We the last time we met in September, you approved a $5 million loan for an airport terminal expansion for Provo City. That was dispersed in February. And so tomorrow we have two deobligation requests. One from St. George City that we talked about, that you approved a $4.7 million loan for St. George City back in April of 2018. And for various reasons, they are choosing not to move forward to financial close with that, and have actually provided us with a letter saying that they are not going to take down the loan. So we're going to ask for you to deobligate that and put it back in the fund. Additionally, last September, Mid-Bell City came and asked for $3.5 million of the $7 million that the legislature directed for them in the SIB. And they would like to deobligate $1.3 million of it. So the total there that we will ask for you to deobligate in previously obligated or committed loans is $6 million. When you net that out, the fund balance becomes $22 million. Are there any questions about the deobligations before we move forward? Okay, let's go down to funds obligated but not yet dispersed. So, Ivan, can you put it so that the screen shows the deobligations and the funds obligated but not yet dispersed? Perfect. All right, so when you deobligate, if you choose to deobligate the $1.3 million for Mid-Bell City, that will result in a 2.163 remaining amount of that loan that you approved last September. And the reason why they want to deobligate instead of cancel the whole thing and start over is that the interest rate was lower last September, and they'd like to retain that. And then Salt Lake County says and funds obligated but not yet dispersed. Last year, you approved a $23.2 million loan for some parking structures in Salt Lake County and at the mouth of the canyons. And when they went to take the loan down, they took everything except $450,000 because of their cash flow situation. So just for accounting purposes, we're leaving that there. It's available to them. They have chosen not to draw it down yet. So that's $2.6 million. When you subtract that from the 22, it gives us a fund balance of 19.4. And let's go down now, Ivan. We have one application from Mid-Vale for $5.5 million that we will be putting before you. And then we also have $5 million from last year's legislative session that was capitalized into the fund and reserved for the inland port. However, the language says that they have to use tax increment as repayment, and as yet they don't have any projects that are producing tax increments. So they are it would be unwise for them to take down that loan at this time. So when you take down the 5.5 and the 5 million in reserve for the inland port, Ivan, go down, please. So if you were to approve the Mid-Vale application, then the unobligated balance, if all other applications are approved, would be $8.9 million. Any questions about the fund balance?
Lyle, this is Nani again. So entities can borrow all lump sum, or they can take half or 1/3. How is the system works?
Well, the way that it works for Midvale, again, the legislature capitalized the state infrastructure bank with $7 million and then directed UDOT to give it to them. And they came to us last September and said, we recognize that you're holding $7 million for us in the SIB. We'd only like to borrow $3.5 million for this one project that we have. And as time went on, and because of the pandemic and whatnot, that project now is 2 point something. So they are asking to deobligate that portion for that. And then this 5.5 is for a separate project further south that I'll show you in just a second with the applications. But rather than take it all out at once for their accounting, because they're doing 2 separate projects, they wanted to take out 2 separate loans.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the fund balance this morning? Okay, Ivan, let's go to the deobligation agendas. And let's start with, there we go. So again, last April, 2 Aprils ago, you approved a $4.7 million SIB loan for an interchange on the Southern Parkway. We negotiated for many months with St. George to try to come up with an acceptable funding source, repayment source that was comfortable for both of us. And eventually it came down to we couldn't get comfortable with a deal. And so they sent us a letter that's on the next page. Basically saying, thank you, but no thank you. We will not need the SIB loan funds. Therefore, we're requesting that the application be revoked. And so we will ask you tomorrow to deobligate those funds that you obligated back in 2018 and return them to the fund for another worthy applicant. Any questions on that one?
May I add some explanation on that particular letter? I have a source that I've talked to the Mayor Pike. The contractor who was supposed to help the city of St. George build the interchange did not want to do it, and that's the reason for revocation of this loan.
Yeah, Nagy, this is Rick.
Yes.
It's all associated with Desert Canyon's development at Burgess and Kirkland.
Yes.
They certainly had plans. They are developing out there right now, and they had plans of trying to open up the Exit 5 interchange and was negotiating with the city on various connections to the Little Valley Road that's just east and north, or actually west and north of the airport. And St. George was not ready to go there yet. So the partnership between those two wasn't solidified to where they could move forward with this loan. I think there's still a plan in the future for Desert Canyons to get the Exit 5 interchange, but right now it's not in partnership with St. George City.
Yes. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
Yep.
All right, let's go to the Midvale deobligation. Okay, so once again, the 2019 legislature provided $7 million to the SIB and Midvale City for parking structures in proximity to an intermodal transportation facility that enhances economic development within the city. And last September, I came to you and on their behalf asked for $3.5 million of the $7 million. And it was for 10 years at 2.35%. They do not wish to change the terms, just the amount. And so they're asking for you to deobligate $1,336,107, which has the practical effect of turning that loan into a $2.163 million loan at the same 10 years for 2.35%. Donna has a question.
Yeah, so if we, so the funds were provided to us specifically for Midvale City. We're de-obligating part of this money, but it's still accessible to them for something else?
That's correct.
Okay. So if a project were able to become complete for less than the legislature has provided, are we authorized to just keep that money for another project, or do we have to return that money to the legislature?
That money would remain in the fund until the legislature did something else with it, or until Midvale found a use for it. And you'll see with the next Midvale loan request that it actually exceeds the $7 million that the legislature directed us by about $700,000. So they're asking for 7.7 in total for their projects.
Thank you. I should have read ahead.
No, that's what this is for.
And
Any other questions about? Oh, go ahead.
Commission also has the right to approve the previous interest rate or choose to go the new interest rate, correct? At this point, because they did not exercise their right to use the money.
Once the new rule goes into effect, that's correct.
Okay.
All right, Ivan, can we go to the next Midvale loan request, please? Okay, so once again, Midvale has, so they basically have two projects. The project that they came to you with last year was up by the Bingham Junction track station and was part of the CHG healthcare campus. Basically, they're putting, and in fact, if you can go down to the map for me, Ivan, just so that I can help orient everybody to the geography. Okay, there we go. So this is Midvale, and this is the former brownfield site. You can see Center Street there, 7800 South. I put on there that, can you increase the zoom? A little more, please. There we go. So that star, the red star, is where the parking structure is going. And that will basically, right now, that's flat parking. The parking structure will go in and enable a vertical office structure for CHG to expand and bring more jobs into that area. And that was what they came to you and asked for last year. And now further south on the other side of Center Street, near the historic Gardner Station. And if you could just go to the next page for me, Ivan. So you see there that Jordan Bluff development. Go up a tiny bit. They're putting it. You can do it, Ivan. I believe in you. Down one more page, please. There we go. And you can see there's a significant Gardner, Zions, Midvale City, all collaborating on a pretty significant development there. And that parking garage is integral to providing additional office space for them in terms of construction, bringing jobs, economic development, the whole 9 yards. This would score, based on the criteria, it would score fairly well if that were in place. So if we can go back up now, Ivan, to the fact sheet. All right, so as we noted earlier, the 2020 legislature amended the SIB statute to provide more flexibility regarding parking structures, economic development initiatives, and projects that provide benefits to political subdivisions, which these projects do. This second project that I just showed you, they expect to be a job creator. And the city has identified and submitted an application for $5.5 million for this project, and they propose to use RDA revenues to repay the loan. And they anticipate this project to be complete within the next 2 years, which is when they would start the repayment. And the interest rate is 2.65, which is 2.15% AAA municipal general obligation bond plus the statutorily provided 0.5%. And if you're comfortable, the city is also requesting a motion that you provide them with the contingent approval to convert to the 15-year term when the new SIB rule that we talked about a couple minutes ago becomes effective. And let's go down to the amortization sheet real quick so that they can see what that looks like. I think this will answer one of Donna's questions. So first thing we do is they say, hey, we aren't, according to the statute, we don't have to start payments until after the project is complete, which we anticipate will be 2 years. So what I did was I said, okay, your 5.5 million, we're going to capitalize that interest then. And that comes out to $295,000. So despite the fact that they're not making payments, they are still accruing interest. Let's go to the next page, Ivan. And the current statute says that, well, not the current statute, but the current rule says that it has to be repaid within 10 years. So if they delay starting repayment for 2, that makes it basically you capitalize the 295 on top of the 5.5 that they've taken out, and then they have an 8-year loan to meet the requirement to pay the loan within 10 years of taking it out. And then let's go down one more. And this is if you choose to provide them with the contingency to convert to a 15-year loan, then the 2-year still capitalized, it's the same amount because it's the same rate, and then it becomes a 13-year loan. They take 2 years of interest and no repayment, and then they start repayment and they pay it off in 13 years.
So shouldn't interest for 2 years be different because one is for 10 years, one is for 15?
2 years interest on $5.5 million at 2.65%, no matter how you slice it, is $295,000.
Okay.
Can we go back up, Ivan, to the fact sheet, please? Specifically the motion area. So right there, the motion that we will be asking for is to approve the SIB loan to Mid-Bell City for 10 years at a 2.65% with repayment commencing in 2 years. And if you're comfortable, another motion to approve loan conversion to 15-year term when the SIB rule becomes effective. We anticipate in July or August.
This is Kevin. Question I have is our secondary source of repayment is the BNC road funds. Is that correct on this part?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no further questions, that concludes my very entertaining agenda item.
Lyle?
As usual, did a good job.
Lyle, you did a nice job. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Lyle. It's, I like what we've got done here. I feel a lot better about this program. You've done a lot of work. Thank you.
I've had a ton of help from Ben and Jim Palmer. I really appreciate their assistance in getting this thing set up.
Oh, Nagi, I know we probably went longer than we expected. I thought the conversation was great. The questions were outstanding from the commissioners. But if there's anything else that any commissioner would like to cover right now, we'd be happy to do so.
First of all, let's ask all the commissioners. Are you going to be here, all of you, tomorrow, hopefully?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nagi, I'm planning on it. I have one question, though. I have the institute I leave has its advisory board at noon tomorrow. Do we think we'll be done by noon tomorrow?
Yes.
I make my promise, yes.
Easy.
I would expect so, Natalie, but
Sounds good. I just, in this case, I will have to jump to that at noon since it's my board.
yeah.
This beautiful Thursday meeting was just purposely designed to answer most of the questions today than tomorrow. So tomorrow will be just a motion and acceptance.
Great. We'll be dreaming of Park City the whole time.
Of course, if you have questions or anything comes up in the middle of the night, we will. Tomorrow's about facilitating your conversation and your decision making.
Yes.
Great. Excellent. Thanks so much.
Hey, Ed, Carlos, and team, I just continue to be impressed by the professionalism of the department. It's wonderful to this is my first, run at this, and it's wonderful to see.
Well, thank you very much. I concur. I'm very proud of this organization.
Rightfully so.
And Carlos, Lisa got me an answer. They are taking out that one-way light there up above Garden City and Logan Canyon tomorrow through the weekend. So I appreciate her looking into that for me.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. It's we believe our people kind of have their their thumbs on things and they're trying to do the right thing, but it's always good for us to ask that question and check on it. So thank you.
Any other question, commissioners, please ask.
Just make sure we get up to Logan in June.
Kevin, I think if we're out of the quote emergency, we're probably gonna do the meeting located here in Salt Lake again, so we can control the environment. But we're also gonna have to. Natalie mentioned it. We have a certain percentage of our population that falls into a higher risk category, and we have to be sensitive to that. Amongst members of the commission, members of our UDOT team, as well as the public. And so I don't like thinking of myself in a high risk category, but some of us do fall into that. So we're gonna, that's gonna have a big impact, I think, on how we conduct our commission meetings. Maybe if even if things feel better all around us.
Well, since Kevin is talking to him, we need to have a meeting somewhere so we can use that truck. Truck out on the road.
I take that as a hard no. About Logan.
Sorry.
Well, we are shooting for September meeting in person at least. This much we can give you hope.
That is our. If everything goes well for the summer, and I think we heard the governor yesterday speak that maybe getting into a green status here near the end of summer. So that's what we're really hoping for.
The shooting Farmington meeting will be in person, hopefully.
Hopefully, yes.
So
We'll all plan to be under age 60 by that time. I'll work on that.
You
I
keep
do.
it fast, Lou. That's how it works, I think.
Can we just make a rule that says that's how it works?
Well, looking forward to tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Thank you all. This is great.
8:30.
8:30.
Please.
Well, I'm not going to turn my microphone on until 9 o'clock, just to give everybody a break. All right.
We convene tomorrow 8:30, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye now.
everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you,
all.
my friends.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Carlos, Spain,
Thanks.
Ivan, Lyle, every one of you, Lisa, all those participated. Thank you. See you tomorrow, 8:30, not 9, 8:30.
Thank
No
you.
technical difficulties. Thank you.